That's how it starts, and then maybe it turns into something better than that later on, but that's not what it was for me. The training itself was the vehicle that I chose to make a stake in the fate of my own life. And because of the weight of that decision and what it meant to me, every single step towards actually making it my life meant that much more. And all the personal development that it took for me to get to that place gave me some skills that I could actually communicate with people on a level that a lot of other bodybuilding coaches can't or don't want to. And so the people that, and you can speak to this as well as a client of mine, coming in, it wasn't just your number on a spreadsheet. I give a shit.
Welcome back to the Happy Positive Energy Game podcast with me, your host, Luke Anning. And I hope all of you beautiful people are feeling bright and warm. And if not, that is exactly why we are here today. I have got a very, very special person in my life coming on this podcast. And I really wanted to touch base with Nick Gloff, who was the first ever coach that I had. Nick is an incredible PSL1, PSL2 coach. Nick, I feel like you've got more qualifications than I can top off with my introduction, so I definitely want to let you in with that. But Nick truly came in where a point in my life where I was really desperate for somebody, and for me to be where I'm at right now wouldn't have happened without Nick. So Nick, welcome on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
You're welcome.
So you want me to go through my introduction then,
There's fitness coaches, right? And then there's Nick. Yeah, dude, like drop in some of the qualifications that you've got, because I think there's Nick. So
well, I can't be the one to be patting myself on the back too hard. But, yes, my name is Nick Gloff, and you can find me on Instagram for all of the things. It's just my name. I don't have any sort of a fancy handle. That's kind of the hub that you can figure out all there is that you need to know about me pretty much in the first caption or two that you'll read off of my page, because it's all pretty consistent. But my qualifications and credentials, I went to school, got my undergraduate degrees in exercise science and kinesiology as a double major, minored in biology while I was there, just for kicks, just cuz. Then, while I was in school, I did a couple years of research in biomechanics, working with ACES technology, with EMG, and all around. It was for rate of force development research, which probably for a lot of the people listening to this is not going to resonate much with, unless you're kind of deep into the strengthening conditioning side of things. But yeah, that's where my official credentials are. And then with certification courses, PSL1, PSL2, which is for anyone that's not initiated into the cult. It's Prescript, level 1 and level 2. I've also done the skill acquisition course. I presented alongside of the Prescript crew as well for their lower body intensive that they had done in Tampa in the last year or so. I've traveled the country a little bit and done some seminars as well with John Jewett and Luke Miller of No Switch Fitness in J3 University. And just some little things here or there. Also, I've done some work with Coach's Corner University, also certified through them. That's a group through Paul O'Need and Tony Montgomery Jr., I've also presented alongside with Tony Montgomery Jr. in the past. He's a very smart guy. Paul is an outstanding guy. Anybody that's looking for certifications in coaching, want to level up, go check out Paul and Tony's work. Get on it and do the same thing for Prescript. It'll be another way for you to level up. Me plugging all my friends. Excuse me, Luke.
You're good, dude. You're good. So, Nick, you're at this place in your journey, and I mean, I've followed along because I've been with you as part of that. But I'm curious up to this point of you becoming the person that you are today. What's the story behind Nick stepping into training and then getting to where you are now?
It's a lot of years to compress into a podcast.
Do your best. Give it your best shot. We got this.
And I'll give it a shot. So everything kind of started for me. Like, I'll just go all the way back to childhood. So when I was a kid, I was very active, and I had some friends that lived really, really close to me, literally in my backyard, pretty much, that I would hang out with every day and just be outside from the time I could until the time I couldn't every day. It was just kind of the way I was. And then when I was about 10, I ended up landing myself in the hospital with appendicitis. And with that episode, I nearly died on the examining table when I had showed up at the ER, and that was an interesting experience, to say the least. And after that, because that day that I had had that come down, I had been active the entire day, and I kept on returning back home, crying home to mom, like, there's something wrong, there's something really not right. She's like, you have a stomach ache, go outside. It's like, okay, all right. And then as the night progressed and I couldn't sleep, I ended up coming out into the living room to try and tell my parents that something was wrong, like, I don't know how many times. The last one, I started talking to things that weren't in the room. And so, yeah, and so my mom called our GP and was like, there's something going on. What should we do? Take him to the hospital now. If that hadn't happened right when it would, I wouldn't have made it, because as soon as I got into the ER onto the table, I was seized out and I was going. And so that experience, and then leading into having some complications with the whole event, I was in the hospital for a good while, and I was in some intensive care. And so I could barely move. I was hooked up to wires everywhere and IVs everywhere, and it was just a horrific experience. I was like the typical, when you see the movie scenes where they're trying to show that time has elapsed. It's like years later. If it's an adult, they have the big old beard. I was 10, so obviously not. But I was a skeleton by the end of that. And it was just kind of all around scarring for me. And my pre-adolescent mind had made an association between physical activity and the pain that I went through in that horrific experience and the near-death experience I had. And so that ended up throwing me into a total spiral for the next couple of years. And that spiral led to me being a master at playing Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi games in my basement while just eating everything that I could, because I did nothing else. And so about a year and a half, 2 years into that, I was completely different. I was a complete bum, total potato. I would joke, talking about my former self, that I was pretty much just a walking, talking blueberry at the time, because I literally had probably my own gravitational pull was starting. But I had realized at that time, because there was a lot of other things happening in my life, there was a lot of trouble at home between my parents and then my siblings, and just a whole lot of drama and craziness. And it was we always lived in parallel to poverty. We were close, we were adjacent. And so it was always pretty hard on that side of things. And as I was taking stock of everything that was going on in my life and my role in it and my responsibility and what I wanted things to look like for me in the future, at 12 years old, I had kind of figured out, if I continue doing exactly what I'm doing now, my entire future is forfeit. I will never be happy. There will be nothing that I'm really proud of. I won't be able to help my family. Won't be able to stand up on my own 2 feet and really do anything of value if I continued to go that way. And so, having made that realization, I then went out and tried for the football team. Fun story about the football team is, in the first week, here's another thing, because you're UK based, so you won't know this, but in American football, in the Pee Wee leagues that we have here, at least at that time, I don't know if it's still current, but there's a weight cap. And you could only play if you were below the maximum weight cap for your position. Right. And so it was 115 pounds for the runners, for all the backs. And it was 125 for all of the linemen. I was roughly 150 to 160 pounds. And it's a summer sport, so I had 2.5 months ish for me to pull from roughly 155 down to 125.
That's pretty aggressive.
And in that first week, at the end of the practices, because the practices were hard, Like, I was so out of shape, it was ridiculous. Like, I should have been having a heart attack on that field. But luckily, because I was a kid, I could still handle it. Just the vigor and energy of a child still, which I was lucky enough to have, that made me through. But at the end of the practices, there was always a group huddle up, where it was everybody from all the teams, from the youngest to the oldest, still within the league, would go and stand around the head coaches, take a knee, and then they would do a recap and talk about the events that are coming and highlight people or push down on people that needed it so they could put them back in their place and get them to work and put their head down. Just everything that you would do as, good coaches would do to try and build up the whole team system morale across all of the teams within. And in one of those meetings in that first week, I was called out specifically and asked, "What are you even doing here?" Like, what? Like, how much do you have to lose for you to even play? Like, well, I weigh about 150. Like, oh, okay. Well, we'll see if you're still back here next week. It's like, huh. Okay. Yeah, and so that's how that started. And then time went on and time went on, and I put in the work. And I dedicated myself to, I was eating nearly nothing, obviously, as you had to make that kind of weight loss in that kind of time. And I was doing so much physical activity. I was running constantly, doing crazy cardio routines. Still, I was starting to do some weight training on my own, and then doing the practices and everything else. It was like triple days for the entirety of summer for me to make it work. But by the time that games started rolling around, I was about ready. And I made it by the deadline. Just made it. And the only way that I could have done that is because I took it on my own and decided that I was going to make it happen. I wasn't going to rely on the system of the practices and just hope that it was going to happen. I knew I had to take it on myself. And so I did. With some help from some friends that were willing to stand by my side and help me. Which one of them was the son of one of the head coaches.
Right. Who
who also became a really good friend of mine and then was my wrestling partner, who was probably the best wrestler I've ever seen on the mat ever. Later on in life. But I went through that process and gained that ability. And by the end of that year, I was a captain of the linemen, because I ended up actually in a drill breaking the arm of the guy that I wanted the position of. And so I took his spot, and the rest was history. And so it was my drill, man. It was the trench drill, and nobody out-bulled
like one-on-one?
No, it was actually 1-on-2.
Okay.
So it was me versus him, and then one other guy who was also like the best lineman on the team. So the guy that I beat was like the main aggressor. Like, he was just a scrappy guy that's just he's gonna do anything dirty he could. Just so that he could beat you out. Then the other one was more of the poised, like, so good that he doesn't have to be dirty type. And he was just beastly for being that young. But I was put against them because I was making a name for myself as the bulldog, because I could just go. And if I was low to the ground, you weren't stopping me. And that was the goal. They were trying to stop me. So the drill is the football is behind these two guys, and there's pads in between us. And so there's pads on both sides, so you can't go outside of the pads. So you're restricted to a single lane forward. You could only go through them. You can't go around them. You're starting right off of the line, so you have head versus two heads, and you have to get through them somehow to get to the ball that's like 3 yards behind them. It's like a fumble drill. And so I got through them. Really the long story short. And so after that whole ordeal, and I got the position, I ended up becoming more of an informal leader. And then as time went forward, I became the leader of the linemen for the football team. And then I started wrestling. And I had actually started wrestling before, but I really hadn't paid attention or cared at all. But I started paying attention and caring and turning that into my sport. And I played both of them for a while, and then wrestling became my primary sport. But with that wrestling was weight restriction, to a further degree than the football was. Because football was just you make it once, and then it doesn't matter after that. You can shoot right back up to 200 if you wanted to be there afterwards. It's not a problem. But for wrestling, you have to make weight constantly. And so it became, and then in middle school for me, I was brought up to the high school team. And so I had to be like on top of that. I had to be there and ready twice a week on average, underweight every time. And I was still growing, so like having to suppress that was really hard. But to do that again, I was having to train before school started, doing over an hour of work almost every day in the morning, and then there would be some weight training with that as well. Practices were roughly 2 to 3 hours, and then I would go train afterwards. And as time went on, I became more and more interested in the training aspect, because I had started already with that passion that I gained through just going through the hard work that it took for me to make it in football the first time. So that's the spark. The spark came from me deciding that I knew I needed to make major changes to me, not just physically, but everything that came along with the physical hardship that it took for me to go and do that, and the dedication to make it happen, and the self-belief that I needed to have to be able to really achieve the impossible as far as you would think, because that kind of time limit is damn near impossible. And on top of that, for my track record up to that point, I had never done anything like that before. So by all odds, and by my own perception, it should be possible. But I had to decide that it wasn't. And that was the catalyst. I decided that I had to make a change. It was on me. My life is going to go the way that I decided to go because I said it now. And then I stuck to it, and I made it happen, and I continued to follow that as time went on. And one of the biggest things that I learned was my typical sports career was good. But there were variables in there that there was nothing I could do to control, right? And as somebody that's going at this in a very meritocratic type of ideal, it's like you put in the work, you dedicate it, you will it to be, and it happens. It's a little bit of a kick in the face when things don't exactly go that way. Yeah. And so I got more and more drawn into the things I could control, which was training. And then improving myself based off of the objective measures that I had set up for myself, rather than the ones that were set upon me by the circumstances of the world around me, having an opponent that was impossible to beat type thing, you know? It was all about me then. It wasn't about anyone else. And that was originally what started me anyway, and it brought me to the place where I started to really dive deep, and it became the one thing that I cared about the absolute most. And then from that point, it was early in high school for me that I had decided that pretty much it was the only thing that I cared all that much about. And I just worked, and I kept my grades up and did everything I could to learn all the other stuff, because I had already done well at convincing myself that I got to play the game to get along. And I did. And then I decided the only thing I was going to do when I went off to school was the only thing I cared about. And I was going to go all in. So I went to school for exercise science and kinesiology, and I did the biomechanics work, and I just stuck my head down, and I just did it all. I did it all. And even while I was in college, I was making large leaps of progress on my own, and I was doing extra education beyond what just my degrees demanded of me. Because I could look around and already know, like, none of these people in these classes are going to go anywhere. Like, maybe they're going to get stuck into a PT program or something. That'll be cool for them. Or Chiro, that'll be cool for them. Maybe they'll get stuck into a strength and conditioning internship somewhere, and that'll be cool for them. But is anybody going to be able to stand on their own? I didn't see it. There were very few. There were some, but there were very few. And so I knew myself that there was something that in this special niche that I cared about, because I attached myself to bodybuilding early. I found that in my high school years, and that was part of what drew me even further into training, because that was the thing I wanted to dedicate to. And so I went at my education as, how do I go and learn everything so that I could make myself the best bodybuilder I could be? And that brought me to spending literally every single waking moment that I had going deep past what I had to read in my books and in my assignments to try and take it to a level where I could have a conversation with a professor and stump them. And that was my goal. And so that I could know everything that made everything in the books make sense. I knew all the systems. I could deconstruct them. I could put them back together every single way till Sunday, and then explain them back from every direction. And then add all the variables that are missed, because they always are. And that's what I did. And I went through school, did it that way, and I started putting out content because I was told to, frankly, by my friends. I was very reluctant to do so because I didn't want to be a part of the Instagram game, but I'm thankful to my friends at the time that they told me to do that, because it's my primary platform that has gained me popularity and given me the ability to sustain my own business, of which I decided as well, similarly to what I did way in my early years. In my last semester of college, I had to make a decision what I was going to do. And because I was sitting right at the top of the class, I could decide what I was going to do. I could go into research. I could go and try and go for the pre-med testing and then go into med school if I wanted to. I could go into PT school if I wanted to. I could go and get my master's and PhD in exercise science and whatever specific study I wanted to go and do. I could have gone in any of those routes. They were all open to me. So I had to decide, am I going to do any of all these possible things? Or am I going to just be a bodybuilder?
Right.
Which is the worst decision you could make. But I decided that's what I was going to do. Because I cared so much about it, and everything else that I could have had, being a doctor or having my name on some more research papers, or I don't know, just all the titles and all the fanciness, and being a physical therapist, which I still think would be cool, maybe in the future. However, it just wasn't as appealing to me, because it was the thing that I got into all of it for. It was either choosing the thing that I decided initially to do, or cop out and take the safe way. And I took the dangerous way. And I dedicated everything from that point to being the best bodybuilder that I could be. And that started to leak into people actually asking me, because even during college I had people that were asking me for coaching that were around me. And I actually mentored a couple of my own friends that I had lived with. And so that was the start of my coaching. And then people outside of them started to see what they were able to achieve, and that became a little bit more of a known thing, and I started to become the person to go to in my area. And then that expanded a little bit further, and I started pushing a little bit more into the online space and gaining a little traction there, and it started to expand out from there. And so it became, instead of just my own journey of becoming the best bodybuilder I could be, I started building other people into the best bodybuilders that they could be. And along the way, and with the development and the reasons that brought me to the place that I got to, it wasn't just out of vanity that I was trying to be a bodybuilder, and it wasn't out of me trying to get girls or any of these things that most guys typically do walk into it doing. Like they get their gym membership, is like, I'm not getting any ladies. I got to try and get some biceps.
Yeah.
It's time to hit the bench press, bros. Like, that's how it starts, and then maybe it turns into something better than that later on, but that's not what it was for me. The training itself was the vehicle that I chose to make a stake in the fate of my own life. And because of the weight of that decision and what it meant to me, every single step towards actually making it my life meant that much more. And all the personal development that it took for me to get to that place gave me some skills that I could actually communicate with people on a level that a lot of other bodybuilding coaches can't or don't want to. And so the people that, and you could speak to this as well as a client of mine, coming in, it wasn't just your number on a spreadsheet. I give a shit. And I take care of everybody. And so me having that ability to actually communicate effectively and be able to understand people for where they are and guide people towards being the best self they could be, and then using bodybuilding as a vehicle, is the way I do it. And I think you can stand as a testament to that as well. And that's pretty much my story in the shortest way possible, and it took only 20 some minutes.
So good, Nick. And there was so many things that I was just like, this is why I was here, like listening to what you said. And something that was really coming up for me throughout that was almost this underlying responsibility of showing up for yourself as being the best that you can be. And then from there, like, yeah, things will expand eventually, but like, why do you think it's so important to take that less so, it kind of almost is hardcore responsibility for yourself? Like, why do you think that that's so important that people do that, not only within bodybuilding, but within the outer perspective that is life as well?
Because nobody else is going to do it for you. That's the whole thing. And then I think nowadays, more so than ever, is that here's a little bit of a socio-political thing that we could add into this for the times, is that maybe 30 years ago, you could grow up, have your normal small town living in your 2-parent household, 2-car garage, go to school, do your thing, mess up, do whatever you want through high school, decide if you're going to college. Your college tuition's $1,200 a month or $1,200 a semester. Whoop-de-doo.
Yeah, swear as much as you
You
like.
can go and do that. You can fuck around there too if you want. Sorry, can I swear? Hell yeah. All right. Sweet. I won't censor myself anymore. Everyone will know how much of a foul mouth I am now. But you could go and do that, or you could just go and work at your parents' business, or you could just go into the factories, or this, that, the other. And that type of a traditional route, there wasn't that big of a gap between like what you needed to survive on and then what was available. Right? Like you had the fallbacks that were going to be uncomfortable for you to go through. Like working in a factory is not comfortable. That sucks.
Yeah.
But you're not reaching for anything. So in that way, it is comfortable. You know that you show up every morning at 5 a.m., you punch the clock, you go in, you earn your money, you get out, and you go home to your people, your friends, your family. You go and spend the rest of your night doing whatever you want. And then it's just repeat the same thing tomorrow. That kind of thing we don't really have anymore.
It's like even harder.
People that live those kinds of lives, you have to work, 2-3 jobs for you to survive? It's much harder. Economically, it's much harder. People need to work 2-3 jobs to be able to survive with a normal quality of life, having a job like that as their base income. And so now more than ever and then that's just an economics thing. So like what you choose to do is going to have to stand on its own legs for you if you're going to actually prosper. So that's one part of it. And then there's the social engineering part of it that we live through right now with the social media game that we live in and all the rest of this like fast-paced life that we have. Everything is in front of your eyes in a snap and it's gone in a snap. And it's the same thing for every single possible passing opportunity. It's in your face for a split second and then it's gone. And that's how it goes, because that same opportunity is going to pass another person's face as soon as it's across yours. And it's up to you whether or not you're going to take it. That other person that's waiting in line, they're not going to shove it back to you and tell you that you deserve it more than them. They're just going to take it. And then you're out of luck. And that's how things go. And our ability to go and do what it is that we want is really higher now than ever because we're kind of backed into a corner and forced to do it. And so there's almost nothing that's more important, especially now, right now in history, in modern history, within the last 100 years. Right now is the time that everyone needs to be able to actually have radical ownership of what they're doing. If you don't, good luck. Because you're going to be hurting and hurting fast. And it's going to be hard for you to come back from that.
It's like, particularly where I've seen the technology go and particularly like how fast things have developed. We've developed so fast for our own good that as humans, we just can't keep up with without taking responsibility for overwhelming amount of information that goes on and can be flashed in front of our face, with taking that radical ownership of your life, you can't genuinely, I think, succeed within your journey right now if you don't take that responsibility, because you just get lost. The world is fast, the world is growing extremely quickly, and that's exciting, especially like for our industry. But then at the same time, it's like you will get lost if you don't take responsibility for that.
Yep, and that happens at every level. And even there's another aspect to this that goes directly into bodybuilding, so I can tie that right back in. Is we live in a time now too where we have food on the shelves. Like the majority of the food that we have on our shelves in our shops right now didn't exist 100 years ago. Like, that's just a fact. And then everyone, like, overall, all of the Western nations that have this problem are also the most sick and obese and depressed of everyone who lived. Yeah. So in that way too, nutritionally and for our own base health, I mean, we live in completely artificial environments. Almost everyone works inside. They're usually sitting for their entire days, which is not something that we're really supposed to be doing. And then all of our food is manufactured with things that we really shouldn't be ingesting. Our water supply is largely contaminated by a lot of things that shouldn't be there. One of the things being a ton of pharmaceuticals that should not be there. And so, like, we're living in and this is something that everybody that's ever done a diet before, even if you're not a bodybuilder, would be able to relate to. It's like, how hard is it for you to stick on your diet? Not just because of you, but because of the entire world that surrounds you. You go to work. Yeah, you go to work and, you know, somebody walks in with a box of donuts every morning, right? And that's just normal. That's totally fine. And everybody takes a donut or two every day. Like, not a big deal. Or on your drive to work, you pass by like 45 different chain food shops that you can, McDonald's, Burger King, this, that, the other, everything. You see that all the way everywhere you're going, any time you're on the road. It's everywhere. And then, like I said with grocery stores, you go into a grocery store, the majority of the food there, I mean, if it's not in the produce section or in like the fresh meat section, like, it's not really food generally, honestly. And so it's all just a struggle. If you just fall with the times and you just keep going with the flow, especially now, we have literally every single way that you could get pushed by the winds around you are pushing you in the wrong direction actively really fast. And it doesn't stop. And so if you have your feet off the ground and you're just letting the waves take you, good luck. Because you're going to go out to sea somewhere that you don't even know where you are by the time that you actually come to. So it's your responsibility to put your heels in the sand and decide you're not moving. And then you take stock of where you're at and then decide what direction you actually want to walk. And that's in every single aspect of all of our lives. Especially with the way that things are now, where things are so... Back in the days, things were a little bit more predetermined. The tracks towards success were a little bit more definable. Because variables weren't so topsy-turvy. We're living in a time where everything is topsy-turvy. Everything. Everywhere, all at once. Quote the movie. And so it's just impossible to not do it.
I sometimes have that conversation with people where we talk about them wanting to be more in flow and do their own thing, but like, I've found for myself, if I don't put discipline within my journey and I don't structure myself and I don't control those variables that we have going outside, like in 4 days, I remember having therapy a few months back, and my therapist was like, you're picking up signs of depression. And it's like 4 days of not structuring myself and saying like, oh, I'll just go with the flow. When, you know, as you do personally develop, as you do grow a business, or you grow into the monster of like having more social media inputs, or having more important people, or having a team, or more clients, you can't do things in just full flow. There has to be some structure. There has to be some control of the variables where you can make sense of things and your brain doesn't panic in the overwhelm that we have, where there's everything's there, right?
Yep. Yep. And sometimes you can fall your way into structure.
Yeah.
You can just fly by the seat of your pants until you can't anymore, and that emerges to you what your next step is. And so I will say that because there's going to be probably a lot of people that feel like you can't get started with something because you don't know all the parts yet. It's like, no, you can start
Yeah.
because you're not going to know everything. And if you're going to decide that you need to know everything before you actually get started, you're screwed before you even try. So don't be intimidated by that. Just start putting a step in front of another. Keep on taking your steps forward. And then if you fall, and you do fall into that spot where you just kind of had to fly by the seat of your pants until you do fall down, then you figure out how you fell down. And then you figure out how to structure everything that you're doing. And that's really the key. Because you're going to fail, and your systems are going to suck, and you're not going to know how to manage yourself or your time, or really how you're spending your time, or what you got to do to tweak the parts of your schedule to optimize it for when your brain functions optimally and how you can fit in your own health stuff for you while carrying out all of your business duties and then trying to expand things and being socially aware and conscious and doing all this, that, the other. You find that routine by stumbling into it. Because you find the deficiencies as you go. You'll probably put all your eggs into a basket at one point or another, then you'll notice everything else goes to shit. Like, oh, okay, great. So I got this down, and now the rest of my life is falling apart. It's like, okay, yeah, and that's when things start falling apart, and you have the signs of depression, and you're stressed and anxious, and everything's everywhere. You don't know how to handle it. It's like, nope, chill, stop. You got one thing right. Now just try to make everything else right one step at a time. And you're going to know where those failure points are because they're going to be painfully aware to you by the time that you actually fail at them. Because they're going to be nagging you in the back of your head as the primary things that drive you nuts when you're going through whatever anxiety, panic, depression, whatever it is. It'll be that voice in your head that tells you, hey, buddy, you're screwing this up. Hey, buddy, you keep screwing this up. Hey, buddy, why won't you stop screwing this up? And then you eventually go, okay, I guess I need to probably wake up earlier and spend some time in the sun and actually talk to human beings and then do better at scheduling the rest of my day and then making sure I'm taking care of the people around me because they take care of me and then paying attention to your clients appropriately, building up your new systems. It'll all come. You're going to suck first, and you're going to suck for a long time. And you're probably going to suck for the majority of the time that you're in business or doing anything because we all suck. It's just some people suck less, and they suck less for a longer period of time. That's what defines your success.
Thanks for that, Nick. It's super insightful. Nick, I really want to speak to something, and I'm curious, do you have a hard stop, by the way, on your time?
No.
Okay, that's good news, because I feel like this podcast may be one of my longer ones.
Typically are if I'm on it.
Nick, I want to speak to something. You were really going forward very rapidly. I think you'd done the 785 for 3 squat prior to it, which, by the way, if you haven't seen Nick squat, it's ridiculous. I've never seen somebody do something, and like, if you haven't seen that, just for FYI, there's a bit of a famous clip of Ronnie Coleman doing 800 for 2 with like with a squat suit on.
And knee wraps. Yep. Yeah. Squat suit, knee wraps,
Yeah.
And a belt.
Yeah, there's all sorts going on, and Nick did 785 slow, like almost paused. And talk me through that real quick, and then I want to end up getting a 785. And was that going to be the limit that you were going to go for? Ask what I was going to ask you after that, but please talk me through how you end, or were you going to just keep going?
So how I got there, I've been training for a long time. That's how I got there.
Yeah,
but that's the really long, the really short way of saying it. But the long way is where to start. Part of the reason I'm able to do that is because I have a genetic proclivity to be strong, and I can get strong fairly quickly.
Okay.
And so that is something that I can just credit to myself. Like, thank you, mom and dad. I got that from them.
Strong genes.
Yes, strong genes for getting strong. But aside from that, though, I spent a lot of time, and a lot of what I'm actually followed for and what I'm listened to for is mechanics and programming and the little nuts and bolts, X's and O's of how to do the stuff on the gym floor the best way you possibly can. That's what I'm known for. And so I practice what I preach. So I put together over years and years skills development work that I had to do so that I could bring my compound work, all of it, to the highest possible level I could.
Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned the squat, and what I don't think 785 was as high as it went.
I think I looked it up before the podcast. It was like I scrolled way back down.
So you might be right, because 765 and then 10.
It might have been 765.
No, it was 785 because 765 is 8 plates aside. So, and then I had 10s on the sides.
Got you.
So yeah, 785. You're right. And then also with that, at the same time, within that same week, was front squat for 675 that I was doing. And at the same time, I was bent over rowing, and I was bent over rowing 5 plates and then 5.5 plates, which is 495 and 545. And I would do down sets with 405 for sets of 20 plus. And my bench and incline presses were up past 400.
Mm.
And you go down the list. Mm. My hinges, I could do a deficit stiff leg deadlift with 7 plates too. And so everything was getting there. So it wasn't just my squatting, it was everything that I could possibly hone in. Yeah, it was everything. And I was getting as strong as I physically possibly could as quickly as I could. Mm-hmm. That was the goal. So I could exemplify what you're able to do if you decide that's your goal. That was my point. Mm. And so I decided that I was going to do that, and I did it. Plus, I love heavy compound lifts, so it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really, driver, love it. It gives me peace. I posted at one point that sitting at the bottom of the squat is where I find peace. That is where I find peace. It's riding the line between your possible death and possible triumph. That is where peace is. It's a beautiful place, and not many people know what that's like. But you sit yourself under 800 pounds, you know what that feels like.
Yeah, I can't fathom having even like standing that up on my back, but yeah, Nick, hats off to you. So I'm not sure how long after, but I remember going through and just seeing it happen to you, but you went through an incident that happened to your thumb, and the injury at the time, I mean, there's a video, you can find the video on Nick's page, and like I remember like hearing your emotions as you were going through that injury, which was not a good experience. But are you able to just first off like brief over what happened, and then second of all, how did you get through from a mindset perspective to recover and then carry on, keep on going on? Because some people might get like a serious injury and then that's them done, but here you are just carrying on, rocking and rolling, doing your thing. But are you able to brief over it, Nick?
Yeah, so it was at April 22nd, 2021. I will never forget that date. I was, I think I was 10 weeks out of a show at that point. And I was having a late night session because I had way too much to do that day. And so training got pushed back. And so I went in, and there was almost nobody there, just going about my thing, struggling. It was a really bad session. Like, from start to finish, it was terrible. Just everything felt off. It was not fun. So I just go in, just do the thing. And by the end of it, I was so frustrated. I was on a rear delt fly on a reverse pec deck. And at that time, I was moving the stack, which is like roughly 300 pounds. And I had a set on it that just really made me angry. Like, it brought my angers for the session to a peak.
Yeah.
Nothing felt right. I just couldn't get anything to feel like it was doing anything. And so I got up to the top of the last rep I was going to attempt on that set. I was pissed. And so I whipped the handles together while my thumb was still on the inside of the one handle. And so I had on the handles, if you're watching the video, handles here, they wouldn't typically be able to touch, but they'd end about here. And so I got it all the way to the top with the full stack, got angry, and whipped it together. And I had this thumb where it was wrapped, and then this thumb was on the inside of the handle, which is a flat plane on both sides. And so it was like 300 pounds free fall force, plus me whipping it together as hard as I could. However many pounds of force that is, I don't know. But the two flat platforms on the inside of those handles crushed my thumb like it was a grape. And so you can see now, if you're watching the video, this thumb is deformed.
It's like flat on the top for you guys who are like looking.
Yes. Looking. It's flat, and there's a divot right through here and off the side. And actually, if you were to ever feel this, anyone that comes to meet me and you ask to touch my thumb will know. I know that you watch this podcast, but the bone on the inside is actually shaped like a V, and so I have like a outward projection towards the left side and the right side, and there's nothing in the middle. And so when I crushed it, I was told, the doctor actually literally told me that this was basically a crushed grape. Like, there was nothing there. Nothing. It was destroyed. And so you can see in the video, if you go and dig that up, just how painful that was. Because it literally exploded. And then the blood was everywhere. It was ugly. It was gross. It was really painful. But you know what the first words that came out of my mouth were? When I actually came to and started actually thinking instead of just cussing.
Yeah.
Like, what am I going to do about my show? I'm 10 weeks out. I'm screwed. That was what was going through my head. It wasn't, oh my God, it's all over. It's like, what am I going to do? Because I have a show to do. That was where my head was. And so that was already in me before I had any decision making to do because of the injury. It was like, how am I going to make this work now? That was it. It wasn't a decision I had to make after. It was already there.
It's almost like the same question almost runs through, at least how I'm reading it, as when you were 12 years old and you saw everything going not the way that you wanted it to go. And the question was, what am I going to do about it?
Yep.
It's interesting. Yep. It's powerful how life can bring us down to like, what am I going to do? To like how those like simple words and one incident that transformed our life then continue to transform our lives moving forward. It's like, for you guys that are new over here, it's like when I went through my second suicide attempt, the words that were there were keep moving forwards. And the same when I had the breakup, keep moving forwards then led me to Nick. And then keep moving forwards led me from quitting my job and then ending up in events marketing and sales. And then keep moving forward got me from there to becoming a coach. When everything hits the fan, it's always keep moving forwards. So I'm curious for you, when shit hits the fan, is it, what am I going to do for Nick?
I would say it's more, what can I do?
Okay. Within your controllable variables, so to speak.
Yep. What can I do? That's really the one.
I love it.
That and find a way. Because those go hand in hand. So what can I do? And then if it's something you feel like you can't, it's, well, find a way. It kind of covers all your bases. And if you're gutsy enough, and this is another thing for me, is that if it's what can I do, and you decided something you can't, and you know you don't ask yourself the second question, you know you're just bitching out. You know there's something you probably could do that you don't know yet. But you're just not willing enough to try because you already feel defeated. And it's powerful just to recognize that. This language is just a mirror into our thought processes. It's a very crude way of getting across what we actually understand on a more intuitive level. It's the best way that we could to universalize the way that people think into things that we could communicate across to other people at the same time. And so using those kinds of phrases, and that's part of why everybody has probably a slightly different one, and the same one that works for you or works for me doesn't work for everybody, is language isn't really as universal as we'd like to think. It's just a mirror into your thought processes, and if your thought processes don't match up to what leads up into the creation of the statement, or what follows after that statement, with all the following questions and where that actually brings your thought processes to, it's a dead end for most people if it doesn't resonate. It's your own words. How you fall into them based off of the events that brought them to you is what makes them meaningful. That's what develops those phrases. And that's also part of the reason why the motivation stuff is such horseshit most of the time. And I think it's a part of it that a lot of people don't actually catch when they think about it. It's like, oh, motivation doesn't exist. It's like, no, motivation exists. It's a biological fact, actually. We can see that. It's like a chemical thing. Motivation does exist. But you're not going to gain motivation from just seeing something that may have motivated another person. It may not be the same for you. It may be something completely different, but it might resonate with you specifically because part of what is being said, what is being communicated, resonates specifically with the way that your thought processes work. Because maybe at one point or another, you've come across a specific situation or an event that you needed to figure out, and then those words themselves, or something to the closest effect to them, had done the same thing in your mind. And you came across them, and then you had to develop a thought process that stemmed off of that to then get you out of that place. And that's where the motivation, like a true root to motivation, lies. It's an understanding that the linguistics of the matter is secondary. You need to figure out what actually resonates to you and then match that with whatever kind of content you're consuming to try and reach that motivation, or what you're surrounding yourself with in your environment, or the things that you just decide to tell yourself. Try to brainwash yourself with words that aren't yours. Good luck. Doesn't work. You got to do it on your own. Again, radical responsibility over where you are. You can't use somebody else's motivation. It's got to be yours.
Nick, what's your driving reason? Like almost your, so to speak, your own words, but almost, I'm kind of almost speaking to your why here. What's your why for what you do for your journey?
It's a hard question to answer because it's something that continuously changes. And I think that's something that maybe we could talk a little bit more broadly on here for a second, is that getting asked that question, what's your why? It almost inherently, it's almost like, it's similar to when you're going through high school and like, what are you going to be when you grow up?
Right.
It's like, I got to choose one?
Yeah.
I haven't thought this through far enough for me to know. It's almost the same presupposition to the question when somebody asks you what your why is. And so it almost traps you into thinking like, oh, like there's one?
There's one thing, yeah.
There's one? Like, no, probably not. Probably not. And it's going to change over time because your values and who you are and what you're trying to do is going to have to change over time, or else you've never grown. You've never developed. You never self-actualized in any way that brought you from the place you started. So my why has continuously changed over the years. And one of those things, and I can actually speak to this with a real event, is that my why for going into school, out of high school, and the reason I pushed so hard during school to do what I did, because school was not easy for me. I have a very hard time with learning, believe it or not.
That really
So,
surprises me, but please continue.
yeah, like here, I'll say it this way: is that I'm very slow at learning a lot of things, and so I wasn't the kid that was, at the top of the class and getting all the good grades because I just could show up and just do it. I had to spend long hours, like tear-filled eyes, like, why don't I understand this? Why is it so easy for everyone else but not me? And had to do that day after day, year after year, over and over and over and over again. I hated school more than anything. It was the worst. And anyone that knows me closely personally, I will say that honestly, college for me were the worst years of my life. I will say that confidently, because of what I had put myself through. Because, I didn't have to necessarily do all the things that I did in college. I bit off a whole lot more than I could chew purposefully so I could make it as hard as possible so I could get the most out of it. And that was from my education side of things, and that was from my own personal development side of things, and seeing what I could possibly tolerate, and then also trying to step forward into things that were outside of my own realm at the time, and then just branch off into do more, be bigger. And so, me having that struggle, I really didn't want to go into further education, but I knew there was no other way. That's also part of the reason why I decided exercise science and kinesiology, because it was the only thing that I cared about. And I didn't want to go to school for anything else. It wasn't going to motivate me enough to go and do it. But the thing that really motivated the decision to do it in the first place was that I knew that I needed to make it. Not for me, but for my family. So I'm the first one in my immediate family that has a college degree. And so my dad, my mom don't. My older sister doesn't. She wasn't going to go to school. She also has a learning disability. And so she wasn't able to. My little brother likely won't either. He's in high school now, and he's just about to finish with the GED instead of getting his diploma. Inside baseball. That maybe everyone shouldn't know on the internet, but either way, doesn't really matter. So I needed to make it because, like I said earlier in the podcast, that my family had always been like poverty adjacent. And my mom had to work more than any human being should have to. And I saw that it was killing her slowly. And that was my reason. That was my why. I was going to make it because I had to save my mom from putting herself into an early grave for being because she's also a cancer survivor. And she was going through that at one of the hardest points in her life that she could have ever gone through that. While everything else in our life as a collective, as a family, was completely falling into shambles in the worst way possible. And she had to, from that point, continue to keep on living and doing what she could to try and support my siblings. And I watched her go through that. And I watched the helplessness and the struggle and the pain of it and the thanklessness of it. And I knew that I had to do something so I could make it, so I could help her, so that I could save her from what inevitably would happen if she had to continue doing that for another 2 decades. Because she wouldn't make it another 2 decades if she did. That was my reason to go to school. That was my reason to try and be successful and be so dedicated to pushing myself as hard as I could in every single possible way I could. Because I needed to do that. And that was a big driving force behind everything that I've done up to this point. But that's one of the whys. And then as I made my decision, part of my why for finishing school and then moving into doing bodybuilding coaching and bodybuilding, originally, coaching was something that I kind of fell into because I was good at teaching and good at speaking and communicating, and I knew what I was doing, and so I could help people. But I didn't get into coaching originally so I could help people. that really wasn't it. So I will not be the guy that's going to sit here and take the credit for being the super altruist. It's like, I just want to go and do something to help the world. Like, that wasn't where I was coming from. I started coaching because I fell into it. I was pretty good at it. It was something that was an intellectual pursuit. And it was going to be able to fund me to be able to live and become the best bodybuilder I could be. That was what the original decision was. And that was the why at the time for that decision. But then as time has gone on, because it's been almost 4 years since then, my why is different now. Because I did the coaching and I spent the time and I did my own athletics, and I'm still continuing to do it. It's not like I've hung up my attempts at continuing to further my athletic career. Not even close. I've barely even gotten started. Like really, I haven't even gotten started. There's a lot more to come. I've got a lot of time. But the why changed away from me trying to do everything so that I could be a better athlete for myself. And then it was, how am I going to tailor my own experience so that I could best serve these people that I was lucky enough to have come into my team? And the way that I went about my coaching, building a real community, is, you know yourself, bringing everyone into a group chat and having weekly calls where everyone can show up if they want. You can come and grill me. Yeah, you can come and grill me if you want. You can throw me the most impossible questions you want, or you could sit there and you can just talk about your week and what you're doing and how you're feeling and just have a support group around you. Like, it's all, no holds are barred. And that kind of thing that I started doing with everybody, and it started to build a real, true community of really connected, really quality people. It's impossible unless you're completely heartless for your why to go from something as selfish as, I'm doing this so it can serve me, to how can I do all of this to serve these people? And that's what my why had became. How can I do this the best for all of my people? And that's how I consider it. They're my people. If they're Team Gloff, they are my people. They're my community. That's why I still have my name on it. Because it means something personally to me that all these people actually trust in me and look up to me, even if they're 20 years older than me. It's like, it's powerful. And that's a responsibility that I take on myself not lightly. It's not something that I can take on lightly. So my whys for everything, I mean, there's a different why for every single major decision in every avenue I take. And so I can't give you a definite why. There's a different one for every single big step in development and every next venture, and what it becomes after it started is usually different than what it is when it started. That's what I've found. So
thank you for sharing that, Nick. It's really, really fucking powerful. Nick, something that we do as a tradition on this podcast is we always wrap this up, and this is kind of funny because you'll know who it is that I'm talking about when I talk about podcasts. So the first podcast that changed my life, I listened to Seth Feroci's HWMF podcast, and I listened to his podcast, and at that time he was like, hey, if you don't like your life, fucking change it, fucking do something about it. And it was at that moment decided to go for a breakup, and then decided to invest in Nick. So really there was a message within that was like, hey, I was at this turning point, I was at this space of desperation, which I know you know, for one, like I literally just out of the blue messaged you, like it's probably like 5 voice notes, like 5 minutes of voice notes, just being like, please help me, basically. For that person who's in that space, who's maybe, you know, considering a pivotal moment in their life where they've got a decision to make, or that they've maybe been waiting on a decision for a long time. Like, I knew this because I'd been watching Nick's content for 8 months before I made a decision to invest in him. And this is beyond just investing into coaching. This is as an outside broader perspective. But for that person who is maybe an older version of a younger version of you, Nick, who maybe was at a hard point in life. I know you took a decision to up and move to where you're at now as well. Mm-hmm. For somebody who's in that space of being faced with a decision, what is a message that you would like to spread towards that person?
If the decision is haunting you, stop deciding and just do it. That's it. You put too much words behind it and it loses its power. You're going to start convincing yourself in every which way, all the pros and cons, and you'll over obsess. Think about, and here's the thing about memory too, because if you're in a bad spot personally and it goes deep and you're in that place, the thing about memory is we tend to, depending on what framing we use, we will romanticize our memories or we will catastrophize our memories way beyond what the actual truth was. And it can twist them, and it can pull a narrative together that is selectively plucking memories from your past that will inform your decision making based off of the framing that you're giving it already. So if you're already looking at everything that you've ever done as a total catastrophe, it's like, what am I going to do now that I'm in a catastrophe? You know what your brain's going to feed you? Every single catastrophic situation that's ever happened in your life, and then every single minor occurrence that became a problem for you because you dwelled on it, then also becomes a catastrophic event that you will play over and over and over and over in your head. That is what will happen if you're in a tough spot and you start thinking about what all can go wrong from here if I mess up. And all that serves to do is actually make you mess up. Because you just standing in one place while you feel like everything is burning to the ground around you is you messing up. Because you could do better if you decide you can, and you will. The only thing that you could do is, instead of trying to weed back through every single painful event of your life and relive it and re-traumatize yourself into doing nothing, decide, okay, maybe take it for granted as everything in my life has sucked horribly to the nth degree. Nobody else has ever suffered nearly as much as me ever in all of humanity. Decide that for yourself. Cool. Are you going to decide to continue to live there? It's your choice. And that's it. And if you could be that blunt with yourself, you'll eventually push yourself into just making a decision. And that's what you need. And that's part of the reason why you would look for a coach when you were down, Luke. Because you needed somebody to tell you, like, hey, you know what? You're doing okay. Like, stop being so hard on yourself. And then also, like, hey, you're fucking up. Get your act together. I need you to do this, 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 and this. And you know you need to do this, so why don't you do it? You need a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. And everyone has both of those voices inside their head. They just listen to one more than the other. Having somebody that will stand over you and tell you that is important, especially in the starting phases. So if you're getting into something that you don't really know how to do it, look up to somebody else that may be able to guide your path a little bit. Or if it's something that's as simple as a decision that every human being can make it, something like picking up your life and moving it somewhere else where you have opportunities where you don't where you are, that's not something you need a lot more further information to go and do. It's a decision. It's like, are you going to stay here or are you going to go? Is it going to be better there or better here? You already know you don't like it here, so take a shot, don't take a shot. Something like that, it's within everyone's power to go and decide. And you only disempower yourself by trying to overcomplicate it.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. I think this has been one of the best podcasts I've done. So just want to say thank you, Nick. We're going to plug all of Nick's notes down below. You've already plugged your Instagram, but it's Nick, NICK, for you guys that do want to go reach out. Honestly, like, Nick, vastly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come over here. And for everybody listening in as well, new and old, we greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to come in and listen to this, and we really hope that you're taking some things out of this, and super excited for you now moving forwards. But with that said, keep being the badasses you are, keep moving forward, don't ever stop, and we appreciate you and hope you have an awesome day.